I'd like to welcome everyone. I'd like to say to my living room, but sadly that's not the case. It's a unique experience for me to share my experience in this kind of way. So I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope you get some value from my presentation. A few things just to start off with is that the good news is that we've made history today, I believe, in that this is the first CPD accredited online meeting in South Africa. So what I would like you all to do to understand, to get the points, of course, is that you will need to stay on my meeting for the whole hour, fortunately. And there will be a screen grab, and I believe there will be an email that you need to email at the end. So you will need to be here at the beginning and the end to get those CPD points. The other thing is that there, no doubt, will be a few questions, hopefully not too many, because I hope that the presentation will clear up all the uncertainties that you might have regarding e.max. But during the presentation, if there are some questions, feel free to type those into the chat box, and at the end we will have some time to cover whatever crops up. So I think that is all the admin, and I would like to continue with something that really changed how I did dentistry, probably more than any other material in my very long career. And that material, as you can see from the top of the screen, is e.max. And in this hour, I'm really going to give you an honest opinion of how I've implemented this material, this amazing material, into my practice in Cape Town. And this is my personal experience. So, yes.
Yeah, I don't think he knows me.
Okay. So really what we're going to look at here is e.max in my practice over the years. So if we look at e.max, it's an interesting material. And what we see on the left-hand side is that there have been so far more than 120 million restorations done worldwide. I believe that it's the most researched material ever. And to date, over a period of 15 years when it was launched, it has a 96% survival rate, which is extraordinary. But I'm going to show you my experience. So I've been using it for more than 10 years. I've done well over 4,000 restorations. And I put this together. It's not scientific, because obviously my survival rate was 99%, which was extraordinary. And I don't believe there's any material I've ever used in 30 years which has this sort of survival rate. I understand that some of these patients obviously might not be living in Cape Town and the restorations might have failed. Having said that, my experience is when things fail, I'm the first to hear about it. So I really think that, to have a material that I can rely on so heavily is just one of the most amazing things in dentistry. And my job really over the next hour is to show you how I managed to move the 96% survival rate to 99. So what were those reasons for success? What were the things that allowed me to get this sort of success rates that I'm achieving? First of all, indications. First of all, indications.
It's all right. We can sit here.
So indications is understanding the times and the cases that we're going to use the material. There's no question planning plays a key in dentistry. No more than today. It's really one of the things that in 2020 for sure cases don't get done without strict planning and real attention to detail. So planning really allows us to increase this number. I think that today, again, whether it's anterior or posterior, we have to understand about controlled tooth preparation. And in other words, we have to have the control of understanding how much tooth we need to remove in order to get the success rate of that desired restoration. Shade analysis is something that took me a little while to understand, and I'll hopefully show you how I managed the problems that we had early on, and the things that we need to really understand in order to achieve the unbelievable shades that we can get from e.max. Adhesive protocols are really important, you know, and I think that at the beginning, if I had slightly higher failure rates, it was most likely due to the fact that I didn't really understand the importance of very, very strict adhesive protocols, which the good news is over the last 10 years have got easier and easier and more reliable for us. Occlusion is obviously another important factor in making sure that these restorations are successful. Of course, I can't go into occlusion as a topic today, but I think we have to have an understanding of the occlusal loads and the occlusal demands that our patients are gonna, and these are gonna be different from patient to patient, but we have to understand the occlusal demands of each case and make sure that we manage the restorations in a way that they have the least occlusal downside as possible. And then of course, maintenance. You know, maintenance is key in any form of dentistry today. So that's something that really I think has often neglected and that we have to cover. So let's look at indications. And I think the interesting thing that's changed a lot for most of us, and certainly for me over the years, is today in my practice, my estimation is that of the indirect restoration, when I started dentistry, obviously all our restorations were fully retentive. We were cutting VMK restorations and we didn't rely on any adhesive protocols. But today, 90% are non-retentive. So where do we use e.max? Veneers, occlusal veneers, in other words, tabletops, veneer crowns, which are kind of 360 veneers. So these are cases where maybe there's been palatal wear and we want to improve the aesthetics. And so we need to also cover the palatal surface. So we're doing 360 veneers is another word for these. Crowns, conventional crowns, anterior and posterior, inlays, onlays, hybrid abutments and crowns in implant cases. And 3-unit bridges, not for me anymore. I know it's an indication. If you go on to the Ivoclar website, you will see that the indication is for e.max is for 3-unit bridges. And I've stopped using it for 3-unit bridges or 4-unit bridges. It used to actually also say we were allowed to do, mainly because we've got better materials, and this is the life we live in. And one of those better materials is, for me, we've changed all our bridges to Zircad Prime because it's stronger, it's as aesthetic, and it's an amazing, but we're not here to talk about Zircad Prime. We're here to talk about e.max. So there's some seriously important things if we're going to understand that 90% of our restorations are non-retentive. And the reason for that really is because we've understood the need in dentistry to be conservative. You know, this should be the goal, and this should be really an objective, because, you know, this is what our patients really want from us, you know, as dentists, is to practice. And we all know the term minimally invasive, but really another word is just being conservative. And it's an interesting paper if you look at this one from Daniel Edelhoff and Sorensen. But really what it says is that, you know, if we start preparing teeth for full coverage restorations, we remove a lot of tooth structure. And if we consider partial coverage restoration, so I think this applies exactly to posterior teeth, but really we have the ability to reduce, we have the ability to reduce only 30, okay, sorry. I'm glad to see that we've reached the maximum, the e-maximum, the e.max number of delegates. So welcome everyone, for those who have joined us after the beginning. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that if we're conservative, we allow really a saving in tooth structure, you know, and a saving in tooth structure really means for me two things: that the health of the tooth really is guaranteed, and that if there's a failure, it's not a tooth failure, it's not a catastrophic failure, it's a restorative failure, which is easy to fix. So really it's an important consideration when preparing teeth. So the other important thing, if we're wanting to achieve these sorts of success rates, which we're looking at in our practice, and it's no surprise actually for those of you who know me that my practice is named enamel, because that's how important it really is. And this is a great paper. There's so many papers that have been written on this topic, but really what it tells us about survival rates, and interesting, if you look in the bottom right hand corner, the survival rate of 90%, 99%, which is what I was talking about. And remember, this is most of these papers were done with feldspathic, not e.max, which is 5 times stronger. But the key to success was bonding to enamel, you know, and preserving enamel in your tooth preparation, which allowed you to bond and control the substrate. So this is super important. So what they said is that in an analysis is that you were 10 times more likely to fail if the veneers or the partial coverage ceramic restorations were bonded to dentine and the margins were in dentine. So it's something we really have to focus on. And again, this goes back to understanding the treatment planning of the case for sure. So when we talk about e.max, the two ways we use it, and we have to understand about monolithic or layered. Very simply, in all honesty, wherever possible in our cases, we want to go monolithic. You know, we don't want to layer cases if possible. Why? Because it increases the cost for our patients, and yeah, increases the risk for some possible fractures down the line, because it weakens, because obviously we're using feldspathic. So if we're going to layer it more often than we're going to micro layer it. And so we're going to retain the strength, the 500 megapascals that e.max has in their flexural strength. So wherever possible, we're going to use monolithic ceramic versus layered ceramic. And I will show you why we need layered, because you cannot just use monolithic, there's no question. So when it comes to ceramic restorations compared to, you know, the old VMKs, which a lot of us grew up with, we had to suddenly understand that there were other criteria that we had to take into account. And these are the 4 things that we have to start thinking about. We have to start understanding about material choices. And when I mean material choices, I'm not talking about whether we use e.max or some other porcelain. I'm talking about what type of e.max are we using? What's the translucency or the opacity of the block or the ingot that we're going to use to create the restoration? And that is not a decision you can make on its own, because there are other things that we need to think about. And those things clearly are the substrate color. In other words, what is the color of the underlying tooth? What is the final restoration color that we're trying to achieve? And the final factor that we think about is the cement color, because with a lot of our restorations, if we go backwards now and we understand that they're non-retentive, that we're trying to preserve enamel, the reality is these materials, these ceramic restorations are going to end up being thin, in which case the substrate color will influence the final color, and the cement color can help us to correct that issue. But bear in mind, cement color is something that we should use only if we have a problem with the restoration and we want to correct the final situation from a color perspective. So it's not something that we rely on at the beginning. It's something that we use, or I use, to help me get the best results for our patients. So we have to have an understanding of these four. And when we go through some cases, we'll have a better grasp of what I'm trying to look at. So here's a case that we can start with. And I've tried to make this kind of presentation quite case orientated rather than just talking. So let's look at this case. The patient came to me wanting me to fix his two centrals. And so if we look at these two centrals, we see that they're different, and we have to think again, what is the final color? The final color will be the color of the laterals. The cement color, we're not going to think at the beginning. We're going to utilize that if we need to at the end. The final restoration color, we've decided, and the substrate color will be determined once we prepare the teeth, because that's going to change. So for sure, one thing that's changed the way I look at the color of teeth is polarized light. And to be honest, there's some things that I just can't do without. And one of those things is a polarizing filter for my camera, because what this does is allows me to really understand what it is the ceramist that I'm working with is trying to achieve. So I need to give him as much information as possible. And there is no better way, in my opinion. As I say, I've worked, and I'll give a big shout out to Shane from Diceram. And I think that if you ever get the opportunity to speak to him, he will back me up in saying that photography is the most useful way to communicate shade. And from this picture, we can start to see the chroma. We can start to see what sort of translucency we have. We can start to see the mamelons. We can start to see all of these things that we're going to try to replicate. So tooth preparation, we understand that we need to be conservative. We want to try and preserve as much enamel as possible. However, in a case like this where we have to block out the substrate, there's two options: to make the ceramic slightly thicker, or to use a slightly more opaque ceramic. So again, these are things, and I will show you tools that have been made available to us, which weren't available at the beginning of my journey, but have really simplified this process. So if we look at this case, understanding substrate, understanding cement, understanding the opacity or translucency of the ceramic, and understanding what we're trying to achieve when it comes to copying, these are the sort of results that we can get, which are really amazing. And yeah, I mean, I get blown away even after 10 years of using this material. So let's talk a little bit about tooth preparation. You know, what's important when it comes to tooth preparation. So I think, you know, like most things in life, I've sometimes learned the hard way, but do what you're told. And so, you know, the R&D that is available from Ivoclar regarding what we should and shouldn't do is extremely reliable. So these were images that I took from their website, and this is really what I copy. So one of the things that are important is that our preparations need to be smooth. We need to have no sharp angles, no sharp edges. And certainly these days with CAD/CAM, we know that this is super important. We finish our preparations with chamfers. You know, a chamfer, not a shoulder, is super important. We need to have clear margins, you know, regardless of whether we're taking analog impressions or we're scanning, but smooth transitions. So wherever there's a transition from one part of the tooth to another, it has to be super smooth. And I think this is really important. And at this point, I thought I'd just include something that I feel also those of you who know me feel quite passionate about, which is is clearance. And so the importance of space, you know, that if I look at my failures, it was most likely in the back of the mouth because I didn't understand the space I'd given the ceramist. And the digital workflows are just amazing, because what they do is they allow us to make sure before we send anything to the lab that we have 1 or more than 1 millimeter of clearance for the ceramic. So it's super important. Burrs, you know, again, what can I say other than I for many years used the wrong burrs to prep teeth, and I got frustrated, and about 8-9 years ago I put together a kit, and this kit is the same kit, and this changed for me everything, because the reality is if we have the wrong tools, any simple job is difficult. So we have to understand what sort of margins we're trying to prepare and use the appropriate burr, which you can see from that table in front of you. And so when we go back and we talked about tooth preparation, if you remember, we talked about controlled tooth preparation. Really what I mean is guided tooth preparation. A very good friend and probably the smartest dentist I know, Philip Garel, back in 2003, so this was just before e.max was actually launched, understood the need for controlled tooth preparation. And so, you know, as a rule, these are the sort of values that we use when we're talking about depth cuts. We're talking about 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, and 1 to 1.5, depending whether we're going to micro layer or we're going monolithic. So 1 if we're going monolithic, and if we're going to micro layer or layer, we're going to go to 1.5. Bear in mind, obviously, if we have a dark substrate, we're going to have to create a thicker ceramic, and more likely we're going to have to go a little bit deeper. But these are generally the depth cuts that we're using, and the only way you can go backwards from a mock-up is if you've done meticulous planning. So meticulous planning is for sure the key. We can then see that it's very simple as to how much tooth needs to be reduced, so that when the ceramic is put onto the tooth, we have exactly the final result that we agreed in the plan and the mock-up. So it's super important. These are the preparations you can see we ended up with, and you know, what do you notice about these preparations? Clean margins, but rounded. There are no sharp angles in them. And as a result, we get these sorts of monolithic e.max restorations. Highly aesthetic, highly strong, and highly pleasing for dentists and patients. So let's talk a little bit. That was as much as, and when we go through some cases going forwards, we can go through some of the issues about tooth preparation. Okay. Let's talk, let's move.
He's very interesting, this guy. How are you doing?
Let's move on to shade communication. So shade communication is super important. And you know, as I say, we've been helped along the way. And for those of you who don't know about this app that you can download on your phone, it helps you understand more these factors of substrate thickness, the type of ceramic, opacity, translucency, and the color that we're trying to achieve. And I'll play you a little video now, and this takes 20 seconds. It's incredible. So it's on your phone. You go to e.max. You download it from the iStore, from on the Android, and here's how it looks. So you open it up. You choose the tooth shade that you're trying to get. The indication, in other words, you'll see that we're doing a veneer. We then have to take an ND shade. ND shade is a stump shade. It's the color of the tooth preparation. We then decide on the thickness of the ceramic based on the mock-up and the wax-up. And from there, you push the button, generate, and it tells you exactly what ingot or block to mill it out of. I mean, that's so simple. I'm going to play it again for you, I think. So let's go through it again. First thing we have to do is decide what's the desired shade of the ceramic. Secondly, what are we doing? We're doing a veneer. Thirdly, what is the color of the prep tooth? Here we're going to see it's ND2. What is the thickness of the ceramic restoration? we're going for a 0.5 millimeter veneer, and we're going to use CAD, not pressed, and you push the generate, and it's going to tell you exactly which ingot or block to use. Here we're doing CAD, so it's going to be a block, and the first choice is LTBL3, second choice HDBL1. So this is how simple life has become for us. In order to think about these aspects that I was talking about. In our practice, there's only one way we communicate shade, and that's with photography. You know, we don't fill in slips, we don't say A1, we don't fill out 7 or 8 or maybe 10 years. We take a series of pictures. We take a series of pictures with the 2 best shades in the top left, bleached 4, bleached 3. We then zoom into the areas of the tooth we're trying to replicate using, as you'll see, polarized photography, the polarize. The missing photograph still is obviously the ND shade, the stump shade, and we're going to give them the best that we can see here. ND2 was the closest. In fact, it looks a little bit lighter than ND2. But with this information, the lab can now go ahead and fabricate using the correct ingot, and will decide, and we will get the desired result. So cementation, let's move a little bit on to cementation, which is super important. Right, so cementation is something that was, for me, one of the most confusing elements of dentistry, you know, because we lived in an era where cement was totally irrelevant, to a point where suddenly most, if not all, or 90%, as I pointed out, of my restorations are non-retentive. And so as a result, adhesion became the most important thing, and it was always really difficult to understand which cement to use where. Having said that, it's now one of the most simple things for me, because if we're talking about e.max and we're talking about non-retentive restorations, we need full adhesive cementation. So in other words, on the left-hand side, you'll see we have 2 choices. We have VariLink Aesthetic, which is an Ivoclar product, and we have a light cure option, and we have VariLink Aesthetic, and we have a dual cure option. On the right, we have self-adhesive cements. So in other words, we're not going to go through any adhesive protocols. The cement has a self-etching facility and a self-adhesive built-in part, but in all honesty, if you look at the bond strengths, they're not even vaguely comparable. So all of my restorations for e.max really are adhesive restorations, and really, unless I'm doing a replacement possibly of an old VMK, and there's a full preparation with no enamel left on the tooth, then I will use a self-adhesive protocol. But most of my e.max restorations, we're going to use full adhesive protocols, and we'll get into that. And then we will have to decide then only whether we use light cure or dual cure. I'll go into that now, because wherever possible, I want to use light cure, because light cure allows me as much time as I need to clear the cement until I decide when I would like to set it with my light. Dual cure, however, obviously, as soon as we place the cement into the restoration, obviously the process starts. So we have less time to cure it. And the reason we use dual cure cements is if we feel that our light can't reach the cement, as simple as that. And what is the information we're given? The information we're given is that if a restoration is more than 2 millimeters, we need to rely on a dual cure element of our cement. So in other words, if any restoration is less than 2 millimeters, it's light cured. We use the light cure option. And if it's more than 2 millimeters, we're going to use dual cure. Right. So the process of cementation is we now use, if we're talking about full adhesive protocols, we're going to use a universal bonding agent. I think this is just the standard protocols for dentistry today and adhesion. and for universal bonding, we understand that it's selective etch or total etch. So if it's an enamel restoration, if enamel substrate, we're going to etch it. If there's dentine, we're going to rely on the universal bond, not etching dentine. And then we have to just look at the cement, Verilink aesthetic, light cure or dual cure, 2 millimeters dual cure, less than 2 millimeters light cure. So what's changed completely is how we treat the ceramic. So the ceramic today, we used to go through a number of complex steps. Monobond etch and prime came along about 4 or 5 years ago, and I switched. It was the alternative, was well, and still today a lot of dentists use it, hydrofluoric acid, phosphoric acid, silane. There were about 4 or 5 steps that needed to take place. And in my opinion, the risk of running into some issues were high. So what is monobond etch and prime is it's an etching and a silane in one bottle, and it allows us really, without having to go through these number of steps, to prepare the ceramic restoration. There's a lot of research on it. It holds up well, and I'm going to give you again from this presentation, my experiences is that in the last 5 years, in all honesty, I've not had one debond. Okay, my failures have been in other areas, but not debonds. Okay, certainly if we understand substrates, and certainly if we're bonding to predominantly enamel. And so just quickly, how do we apply it? We're going to apply monobond etch and prime to the surface. We're going to agitate it for 20 seconds. We're going to leave it for 40 seconds, and then we're going to wash it thoroughly, and that's it. So it really couldn't be easier. When it comes to anteriors, and this presentation, we're dealing mostly with anteriors. I don't do any anterior ceramic restorations without trying in with try-in pastes, because I believe that it's very easy for us to really make something that's really good into something that's super special by really just changing the value of the cement where necessary. I wouldn't say it's necessary all the time, and all of our restorations, we aim just to use neutral cements. But we know that with thin ceramic restorations and with different substrates, this isn't going to be possible with them. And so we're going to have to change the cement periodically. So we have options. We have light plus, light, neutral, warm, and warm plus. So in most of the time, I think when we have ceramic, more often than not, we need to increase the value. So we're going to go light or light plus, and very seldom we're going to end up having to warm them. But always we do try-ins, and we do try-ins before we give anesthesia so the patient can smile, see the restorations. When they're happy and I'm happy, then we anesthetize and we use the relevant cements that we've done in the try-in. I'll quickly show you a case. So here was a case of ceramic restorations. I think we did from 4 to 4. This was a try-in, and if you're looking at them on the left of the screen, you will see that we're using, I think, a BL3 ingot. We had neutral cement, and if we look at the lower teeth, the patient just thought that they were a little bit high in value. So we switched to warm, and if you look from the right-hand side on the screen, which we're the patient's left, what you see is that slightly decreased value, a slightly more aesthetic looking restoration. And if you look under polarized, it's a small detail, but honestly, and this is what our patients are looking for these days. So here we changed from neutral to warm. I think isolation is super important, you know, and very quickly, I can't go into it, but we have 3 options. First prize, full dam. Second prize, split dam. Third prize, Optrogate. You know, that I will not do any full adhesive dentistry without some sort of isolation. That's it. Simple as that. So here we went for a full dam option. And these are the restorations now in place. And if you look at the warmth on the neck of the canines and the laterals and even the centrals, and you look how it blends with the lower teeth, these are monolithic. I still get so excited when I see this sort of stuff, you know, and combined with the ability to now in CAD/CAM use natural designs, natural algorithms of beautiful teeth, anything is possible in my opinion. So we have about 5 minutes left, and then we're going to get to some questions, and really we can go back and answer anything that I've covered maybe too quickly, and some of the things that you might not have got. But I'm just going to take you through a case, one case now from the beginning to the end, and then we'll get to the questions. So the patient-driven, and this is super important, the patient-driven, minimally invasive approach is now the norm. And this is possible with amazing digital technology and the development of new materials. So actually the materials are not that new because we've had them for 15 years. But really, I think our patients, as I said before, are looking for minimally invasive dentistry, and this is really the reality today. So let's have a look at this case, Alice. Photography, you know, and making decisions in the mouth, in my belief, is that we have to understand about facially driven dentistry. And so if we look at these three pictures, what's brutally obvious, if you look at the middle picture, it's hard to see that she needs longer teeth. But if you look at the left and you look at her rest position and you look at the right, clearly we can see that she's missing tooth structure. And if we take an intraoral picture, we can see that there's been some wear on the centrals. She has a small diastema she doesn't like. So the reality is that in this case, most of the damage is limited to her centrals. So without understanding facially driven dentistry, it would have been very tempting to just treat these two teeth if we didn't understand what the patient was looking for. Because what really is the patient looking for? She's come to me to improve not necessarily these two teeth, but she's come to me to look for an aesthetic solution. She doesn't like the way her teeth look. So, and those of you who know me, DSD is just part of the way we do things. The planning starts with a DSD, a 2D design. We take the patient through a 2D design, and surprise, surprise, what we see is instead of 2 teeth, she needs 4 teeth fixed. So from the 2D design, we're going to create a 3D design. From the 3D design, we're going to do a mock-up. I mean, I think that most of you, and I can't see, you know, this is the surprising thing of doing a virtual, doing a kind of virtual meeting, is I don't see anyone, but I believe you're all there somewhere. So we do a mock-up. We don't do any dentistry until we understand the end result. Okay, we don't start drilling teeth until myself and the patient understand the implications of the positive implications, by the way, of the dentistry that we're proposing. So from the mock-up, we take shades. You've seen this now. This is how we do it. Polarized filter. This is how we communicate with the lab. And we're going to give them the best 2 options. I don't give them 15 tabs. I pick the best 2. We're then going to do guided tooth preparation, controlled tooth preparation, okay? Understanding the importance of enamel. So not just from a facial, we have to also understand what's happening from an occlusal point of view. So again, you know, this is something that we've been using in our practice for now 10 years, is we make indexes for each case so that we understand about the volume, we understand about the final design, and we work backwards. Stump shades, we have to communicate with the lab. It is not possible for a lab to create ceramic restorations without understanding the basic color of the teeth that we've prepped. So today, yeah, I really, you know, if I had a little bit more time, I would go into the positive benefits of moving from analog dentistry to digital dentistry, but that's not my job. My job today is to explain e.max. So this is how we temporize. We're going to use the mock-up. We're going to spot etch the teeth. We're going to take the mock-up and place it back in the mouth. for a week. We're then going to clean. And so cleaning is honestly one of the key elements to adhesion. We don't do any bonding, direct, indirect, in our practice until we've cleaned teeth with air abrasions. 29 micron aluminium oxide is what we're using. So cleaning is a key element of good adhesion. Total etch in this case, why? Because it's enamel. Total etch, if it was dentine, we would use selective etch. In other words, etch the enamel, not the dentine, and rely on the bonding agent. What are we bonding to? Enamel. You know, this is honestly, you've heard me say it many times, but this is the key to successful dentistry if we're using partial coverage restorations. So in this case, universal bond, tetric N bond, universal. We're going to apply it. We're going to air thin it, and we're going to cure it. This is super important. We're going to cure it before we put the cement. And why do I prefer this method? Is it allows it allows the cement and the bonding agent to stay separate. You know, so it tells me this is the most reliable way to achieve the best bond strength. Okay, so this is really important if you're using this system. Is you apply the bond, you air thin it, and you cure it before you apply your adhesive resin cement, which in this case, you know, we're going to choose. We would have done a try-on with whichever paste. If we're using neutral, we're going to use VariLink Aesthetic Light Cure. Why? Because it's less than 2 millimeters, and I have then a lot of time to do the cleanup. We bond 2 at a time, as you can see from this picture. I don't spot cure as a matter of interest. I put the restorations on, make sure you have cement all the way around the margins. If there isn't, take it off, put the cement, put the cement back in there and put it back. Once we can see that we have resin cement all the way around, I use a brush to get rid of 99% of it. Then I spot cure, then I trim it, then we final cure. Obviously glycerine, we need to understand about the oxygen inhibition layer. So we're going to use glycerine and whatever products it is that are available to make sure that we get a proper bond. We're going to then go and do the others. So here we can see an example of a split dam and a cord. So here we'll use a 000 cord with no impregnation. But look at the enamel. You know, this is the strongest restoration in my opinion. And these are the final results. Look at the color integration. Why? Because we understood the issues that we were dealing with. We understood what was the final color we were trying to achieve. We understood about the substrate color. We understood about the thickness of the restoration, the choice of the ingot or the block that we were going to mill, and the final restoration color that we were trying to achieve. And what are these? These are monolithic restorations. Is this an important picture? Maybe for us dentists on this webinar, yes, but for the patient, is this important? No way. What's important is what they see. And judge us, in my opinion, on the aesthetic outcome. Yes, later on, in fact, they won't even judge us on the cost most often. They won't even judge us whether it hurt. They might judge us how long it lasts, but that's only in 15 years. At this point, they're going to judge us on the aesthetics, on the facial aesthetics, on the dento-labial facial aesthetics of the case. And I mean, maybe I'm biased because I did the case, but I think that really this has changed the way I do dentistry, and it's been one of the most, if not the most positive thing that came my way in my many years of being a dentist. So my objective was to spend 45 minutes. We've covered a lot of topics. We've covered obviously indications. We've covered cementation. We've covered tooth preparation. We've covered adhesion. We've covered isolation. Occlusion, I would like to say that we could have spent some time, but it's super important that we have to understand that we need to manage occlusal loads. And what that really means is that we have a mutually protected occlusion. But ultimately, you know, our patients judge us on these pictures. And in my opinion, it is all about the face. And, you know, as I say, I'm biased, but if you look at the result that we achieved for this case, yeah, I'm blown away. So with that, I'm going to move on to the questions that I would happily answer that we have. So I will stop sharing my, I'll stop sharing the screen. There we go. Right, there we go. We're back with the land of living.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, guys. I think you will all agree that this was a great lecture, a good 45 minutes, time well spent. Thank you very much, Mark, on behalf of...
It's a big topic, to be honest with you.
Yes, absolutely. So, guys, before I even go on to the questions, this was really just a teaser. Mark's 2 or 4 day advanced restorative courses are all worth your money spent. Please keep a lookout on the Implant and Aesthetic Academy's website and Facebook page for his courses.
That's very kind. Yeah. It's a huge topic, and you know, I think these are things that we just have to start thinking about when we lift our handpiece, you know, as best we can. But you're right. I mean, 4 days. What could be better?
Very well said.
Right. Question.
Okay, so Mark, we've just got 2 questions that have popped up.
Oh wow. Okay.
Anton Beertge asked, do you set patients' expectations before the treatment in terms of supragingival margins? If so, when do you do it?
So, you know, I think the question for that is a pretty simple question, because the reality is that it's impossible to understand that we can allow supragingival, because let me answer it in a different way. Wherever possible, I want to place my margins supragingival. Why? Because it's easy to prep, it's easy to take an impression, and it's easy to cement, and I control the moisture. When can we do supragingival? Obviously, when we have the correct substrate colors. So in other words, if I have a tooth that is non-vital and has a substrate color issue, then we have to understand we have to go subgingival. So do I explain to patients about this? Not really. All of them were actually supragingival, but we didn't see the margins. So I don't believe that with ceramic restorations, and certainly the case if you're bonding to enamel margins, that we have to be concerned about supragingival margins. I mean, does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So if we have really accurate ceramic restorations that fit well, and we're bonding to enamel, and the substrate is not an issue, then supragingival is not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Muhammad had a question as well. He wanted to know, what bond do you use on your temps?
So I don't use any bonding agent. So if you looked at those temps, I think that it's, you know, super important if you think about impressions for veneers, or if you think about impressions for crowns. Certainly the first case where we did full coverage, there obviously you don't need anything to hold them, because the retention of the preps will hold them on. When we're doing veneers, remember that certainly for more so for CAD/CAM, a little bit less, but I think it applies for analog impressions, is that we need to separate the teeth. And what I mean separate is there needs to be a small space between the teeth, so that in the digital workflow, it can read the margins. And we're talking interproximally now. So how do we do that? We use a metal strip, and we go in slightly. It's about the thickness of 2 thin metal strips. That it's about just to give it some idea, about 0.2 of a millimeter, 0.1, 0.2 of a mil. And so what does that do is it opens it up. And so if you now take your mock-up and you put it back in, the mock-up will move into the interproximal areas and the embrasures. And so most of the time, just this will be enough. So I'd never take the temps off. So we're going to go back. We're going to put them on. The diamond or with the scalpel. But we never take, so it's a shrink wrap. So remember that the Bizacryl also shrinks as it sets. And when it goes into the embrasures, you know, honestly, most of the time I tell my patients they can't eat, they can't do this, they can't do whatever. And then they come back a week later and they see me sweating to get the things off. And they say, I thought you said I couldn't eat. So yeah, I don't really have that problem. I'd be lying if I said they never come off. But yeah, we use the embrasures, don't take them off. And if you feel you need extra, just a little bit of etch, spot etch in the middle of the tooth, like I showed in that one case.
Okay. Another question from Muhammad as well is, why no hemostatic agent on the retraction cord? Okay,
so the problem with hemostatic is that obviously it interferes with the bonding process. So you know, you don't want the hemostatic. If you look at hemostatic agents, they're gonna interfere with the bonding agent. It's gonna get into the bonding agent and it's gonna weaken it. So you know, another great tip that I can give at this stage is, if you looked at those cases, there was no inflammation. Why? Because the margins were supragingival. So, you know, actually the retraction cord is just to move the soft tissue slightly out of the way. It's not to stop bleeding. That's the first thing that I would say. What changed for me a lot when I did temporaries was understanding that when we allow patients not to floss, that there is an issue with hygiene. And so what I've done in the last year or two, which changed everything when I'm doing veneer cases, is that I give them a tube of chlorhexidine toothpaste, okay? Because it makes my life easier when they come back. And what they do with the chlorhexidine toothpaste, I think it's 0.4%. It's the strongest toothpaste that we get, is that they're told to brush with it morning and evening. And then last thing before they go to sleep, they take some of the toothpaste, they brush it into the veneers, into the margins, and then they're not allowed to rinse. So that chlorhexidine stays in the margin for the whole night. And when they come back, I don't have any more inflammation. I used to have a lot of inflammation, but the inflammation now is gone. So it's a real cool tip.
All right. Another one here from Fritz Gerber from Brooklyn Dental Lab. He's just wanting to find out, how do you ensure to not get a dark triangle between the two centrals when closing a diastema without creating an overhang?
Yeah, okay, that's a super important question, and that's all about tooth preparation. You know, and again, what we need to understand is that if we have a diastema, that there's no way you can do facial coverage. In other words, you can't have a veneer that sits on the front of the tooth. So the moment we have either a dark triangle or a diastema, because they're essentially the same thing, you have to break contacts. And the bigger the diastema or the bigger the triangle, you have to then consider going subgingival, so that the emergence profile of the ceramic allows there not to be an overhang.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That you can't have a facial. You have to break contacts. And as I say, the wider the diastema, the bigger the black triangle, you have to then consider that you have to go subgingival. And even if it's a compromise and you have to go into leave the enamel, you know, that's the judgment we have to make as clinicians. And so the moment I feel compromised on the amount of enamel that I have, then I'm going to change the preparation from just a facial to a full coverage. It doesn't mean a full coverage ceramic. I'm still talking full coverage veneer prep. So the margins circumferentially are now still 0.3 all the way around, but we've now built in some retention from the shape of the preparation. Does that make sense?
Yes. I can't pick up a name here, but he asked, it's just a product question, why cure the bond before cementation?
Okay, so why cure? It's not curing it, it's spot curing it. So the difference, I mean, I think that was the question. So when we use light cure and dual cure, we have the option for the cleanup to spot cure it. So, you know, one thing I found is that the light cure, and maybe you can, as as someone who works with Ivoclar products intimately, it's been my experience is that, and that's why I don't let my nurse do it. I always do the spot curing. It's super important, because if you spot cure, so a spot cure for me, light cure cements are more sensitive than dual cures. Yeah. So if a spot cure for dual cure is 5 seconds, for light cure it's 2 seconds. Yeah, 1 second.
1 second.
And
yeah.
So yeah, it's very much more sensitive. So if your nurse does it, she doesn't understand what 1 second is. And if you spot cure for slightly too long, you've missed an opportunity. You know, that's the problem. So spot curing then allows you to remove the excess, okay, while it's still soft. It's not soft, but it hasn't set.
Okay.
So
I just covered he was actually asking about the bonding agent under the restoration.
Oh, so okay. Sorry, I misunderstood that.
The technology built in with the bonding agent. So it's got a super thin film thickness of about 10 microns. So it won't
10 microns, even less.
Interfere. No. So
but it is super important to ethin it. I mean, you know, that's one element that I have to be honest, I've used now this protocol since it was launched. And as I said, I think it's about 5 years now. Honestly, I've not had one debond. Yeah. I mean, honestly, you can come and look at my practice when we all get back, hopefully quite soon. And you can look through all our records, and you can see that actually that, you know, I'm giving an honest opinion of my experience with e.max.
Okay. Dr. Spaltz is just wondering whether you are your restorations all lab fabricated, or do you use CAD/CAM chairside technology to make your crowns and veneers?
So I don't use chairside. I use only lab, and why is because I think that a lot of my cases are multiple units. That's the first reason, you know. So it's easier for someone else to do it outside of the practice, because they're better than me, in all honesty. At managing this element of it. Having said that, I really think that for single units, at some point in the near future, that we will most likely mill them, you know, in-house. But yeah, I feel that if we're doing multiple units, and really, you know, the workflow, the workflow from a digital point of view, is that I would lose control on the case if I tried to bring it in-house. You know, I think that it's a certain skill of managing the workflow from the designing to then creating that design, or using that design that we created before treatment into making sure that the final restorations are exactly how we wanted them. So yeah, I think maybe there's some dentists who can manage that, but I can't, to be honest with you. You know, that's a specific. And the staining and glazing, and you know, it's a different skill. I'm good at treating patients.
Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one last question. Okay. The questions that are answered after that, I'll just get back to you guys with a short email. But just someone off the topic wondering if you use the take the shade digitally with your 3-shape to send to Shane. Do you ever utilize that?
I do, and I've done a lot of research, and I mean, I don't mind spending 2 seconds on this, because actually, and those of you who have been at my lectures know how I feel about this, is that a long time ago, I decided that if you look at the research, it told us that over 90% of teeth are A shades. And what are we doing? We're not looking, when we take a shade, we're looking at the chroma of the tooth. In other words, what is the dentine color, you know, that we're trying to replicate. And so most of the time, 90% of the time, they're A shades. And with my 3-shape scanner, I had the opportunity, using the built-in facility, to analyze the shade. And what did I find is that I wasn't surprised. Well, I was happy to be surprised, not surprised, that when we used the built-in shade analysis, that again, they were A shades. And yeah, I do take it. I use it often for posterior teeth. You know, I mean, when I talk, but if it's anything in the front of the mouth, I will use, I will still take photographs, you know, but it's super accurate, to be honest with you. So I think it's a great addition, and it's another, if you listen to my lecture on why digital, it's 100% one of the added things that have just changed the world for us, you know. Because how many times does the lab phone you 2 days later and say, you forgot to fill in the shade? I mean, it's happened to me, like, come on, you know. It's like, okay, make it A2. We just guess. But now it's like not a problem, because we just open up the scan and I can measure it. And so, yeah, having all of these things, really, for me, it's a no-brainer as to analog and digital. So yes is the answer in a long-winded way. I think it's amazing.
There we go, guys. I think that's a wrap. We've hit 12 o'clock. Mark, thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure.
We really appreciate it.
Great.
And like I mentioned, please have a look at the Implant and Aesthetic Academy's website and Facebook page.
If I just say one thing just quickly about that, is that actually, because we're all where we are, which is like not being able to be in our practices in the big wide world, is that at the Implant Aesthetic Academy, we are going to be loading a bunch of really cool, interesting cases, restorative implant cases, in the next few days, weeks. So yeah, have a look out for the Implant Aesthetic Academy Facebook page, because we're in the process of putting that all together. But yeah.
There we go.
Thank you very much for the opportunity as well. It brightened my day with a smile on my face.
On behalf of Ivodent and Ivoclar Ivodent, we just like to thank you for sharing your invaluable knowledge with all of us. You're saving us a hell of a lot of years. So
no problem. I really enjoyed it. It's my pleasure. And everyone stay safe, you know, do what they can do. And yeah, hopefully we see you back where we all need to be in our practices as soon as possible.
Great.
Thank you, Steph.
Enjoy lunch, guys. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. All righty. Bye now.
Bye.